There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with another tag. This is a fabulous new tag by a relatively new booktuber who I already love. This is the Let's Get Shameless tag, originated by Dan at the Weird Book Club. Put a link to his video. Please check him out. He talks about quote-unquote weird books, and he does so in a very entertaining and occasionally homosexual manner. He's a really fascinating guy. I'm actually in the middle of a buddy read with him. He's a breath of fresh air on BookTube, but the prompts are all relating to shamelessness in one form or another. So I was going to wear my muumuu and my rainbow, what do you call it? My rainbow lei, but it's at the dry cleaner, so. Prompt number 1. Shameless Personified. A book, character, or writer who you feel best embodies what it means to be shameless. And I have 2 Lucias to tell you about. 2 of my favorite characters in reading from the last several years. Both, interestingly enough, named Lucia. I can't remember how the name was pronounced in the first novel, which I did on audio. I could have gone back and checked, but I didn't. It might have been Lucia, but certainly Lucia in the second one. In the first one, this is Jesse Ball's novel, How to Set a Fire and Why. Jesse Ball is a man, and he has written one of the most unforgettable young female protagonists in anything I've read in years. And Lucia, I will call her Lucia, she's a badass teenager living with her aunt in a garage. Not above the garage, in a garage, which has been converted into a rental suite. And they are way behind on the rent. So that's her home life. Her mother is in a psychiatric institution and she visits her there. Her father is dead. She is absolutely brilliant, and she has a sarcastic way of talking about her life that just is so endearing, and I love her. She is still stomping around in my psyche all these years later. When did I read that book? In October 2016. Next is this 1935 novel, Map and Lucia by E.F. Benson, one of my all-time favorite novels of the 20th century British literature. I read it probably the same year, 2016. This was a big recommendation from Thomas of the Readers Podcast, and I read it because of him raving about it. I don't really enjoy comic fiction. For example, Benson's counterpart, what's the, Jeeves? I read one of those books, and each story was the same, and there was no point to it. It was just mildly funny. I mean, it was funny, but you'd read one short story, you'd read them all. Whereas this was a really satisfying novel with comic characters, and it also was intellectually stimulating and just an absolute delight. And Lucia is the main character, and probably her parents pronounced her name Lucia, but she married a Italian guy, and she changed it to Lucia. She is a snob and a manipulator, and you can't help but fall in love with her. She's a widow when the novel opens. Her best friend is gay. Hello! And they decide to move to a neighboring town for a change of pace, and they rent Miss Map's home because the people in this neighboring town have a tradition where everybody moves down one level on the social hierarchy into the other person's house so that everybody has a change of pace during the summer. So Miss Map is the top dog of the town, and Lucia rents her house. And then a rivalry and competition and catfight unfolds between them, which is the center of this delightful novel. So intelligent, the humor, it's how the intricate and comic plot is woven through with so much sarcasm and so inventive. I love this Lucia too. Number 2, Shameless Suck Up, a book outside your comfort zone that you read mainly because you appreciate or admire the person who recommended it. I don't tend to read stuff outside my comfort zone, especially wouldn't usually entertain that kind of a recommendation from somebody, but I do have one, actually, and it's one I've been raving about recently, so I won't go on too long about it, and that is Ian Lee's Dear Friend, From My Life, I Write to You in Your Life, which I read just about 3 weeks or a month ago. And this was brought to my attention by Eric Carl Anderson, and I believe it was his 2017 year-end video where he said this was one of his top reads, or maybe his top read of that year. And I bought it soon after, and I kind of thumbed through it and read a little bit more about it. It's memoiristic essays by this Chinese-American writer, and a lot of sadness, and the title I thought was so hokey, but I think the title is a quote from Flannery O'Connor, maybe? Anyway, I finally pulled it off the shelf for the Asian Readathon, and I will link to my video because I'm not going to try to reinvent the wheel. You can go and check that video out. But this book has changed the way that I read, and I will be rereading this book forevermore. Ian Lee was already a successful Chinese-American novelist. She moved to America as an adult. She was a scientist, and then she just changed her life completely and started writing fiction. And then, after having several well-received works of fiction published, had a mental breakdown and was hospitalized for long periods of time for suicidal depression. And this is about that and about her dialogue, mostly on the page, with writers, published letters, writers' biographies, and their fictional works as well, and one face-to-face friendship with William Trevor, the Irish writer, decades older than Ian Lee, with whom she had a close friendship in the last years of his life. And those are the topics of the essays that she writes. So they're really heavy and quirky and, to put it mildly, thought-provoking and really, really moving. So I will be reading these again, and I went something I've never done in my life before. I went directly from one book to another book by the same writer, put one down and pick the other up. It was almost that fast. I am just obsessed with Ian Lee's. I don't like memoir, don't like essays, didn't sound like my kind of a book, but of course I admire Eric greatly. He's my favorite booktuber, and we don't always agree. We don't often agree, but we sure agreed on this one. Oh my God! Number 3, Shameless Plug. Talk about a book or writer you'll recommend to anyone you meet because they need more attention, damn it. I don't know actually that I would recommend this to anyone, but if I had to think of one book that I have read in the last few years that hasn't received nearly enough attention and that would appeal to a fairly wide cross-section of readers, which is not my strong suit because I tend to read weird stuff, see some prompts farther down the list. But this one, I think, not the general reader, whatever the hell that is, but for example, Dan, I think you would like this book. But this is a book about a 20-something college wrestler built like a brick shithouse, heterosexual, and obsessed with winning the wrestling championship. Stephen Florida by Gabe Habash. Does this sound like a Sean book? Not at all! And it's one of the most incisive portrayals of the male psyche. I know a lot of non-straight white male readers, and I count myself among them as a gay male reader who aren't necessarily wanting to expose themselves to the heterosexual male psyche. And I'm here to tell you that in this novel, it is worth your time. And yes, he's a tough, butch guy, but he's also got a very sensitive personality, and I was on the edge of my seat through parts of it, wondering just how much of a brute he might end up being. And I'm not going to give any spoilers. I'm here to say it's worth your time, and it's beautiful. I loved the character. I loved the novel. I will read anything Gabe Habash writes. And this novel, not just because of its gorgeous cover, deserves so much more attention. I need a cigarette after that. Number 4, Shameless Snob. A text that speaks to your very, very particular interests. Stuff so obscure that it almost feels like the book was written just for you. Well, that's pretty easy for me, and regular viewers of my channel will not be surprised by this. I have a guilty pleasure that I love occasionally, one or two a year, and my whole life have enjoyed reading books about the modern British royal family. I'm not a monarchist particularly. I don't care about the politics of it. If they get rid of the monarchy or Canada gets rid of the monarchy, I won't care. It won't change my fascination with them as my own personal gods. Not that I worship or venerate them. I don't. I just find them fascinating. And it started as a young queen myself, reading a 900-page biography of Queen Victoria when I was about 11 or 12. And one of the top reads of this year, a book that I could easily pick up and read from cover to cover again, it was that good, is The Quest for Queen Mary by James Pope Hennessy. And this is so down in the weeds that this is an addendum to Pope Hennessy's Queen Mary died in 1954, 1955, something like that. And I believe his biography was written shortly thereafter and published in about 1960. He interviewed most of the members of the royal family and lots of noblemen and servants and everybody. But the juiciest bits he couldn't include in a biography of the recently deceased matriarch of the British royal family in 1960. He just couldn't. But he kept those notes, and he was such an elegant, beautiful writer that they have been published here verbatim. And it's just fascinating. So I have a full review to this. I will link it. I think if you don't know whether you're interested in the British royal family or not, but you appreciate good writing and, you kind of have a historical bent, try it. It's just... it's like crack cocaine for neurotic queens like me. Loved it. Question number 5. Shameless Fan. Talk about a book or writer you'll keep returning to despite the fact that there are literally millions of other things you could be reading. I'm going to choose 3, and one I've already talked about, so just hold this up again. This is one I will be rereading for the rest of my life. Ian Lee's Dear Friend from My Life, I Write to You in Your Life. Also, J.L. Carr's A Month in the Country, a novella which I have reread for the first time. In other words, I've read it twice. Reread it the end of last year, or in January this year, something like that. And it had been a 5-star read when I first read it 2 or 3 years ago, and now it's a 7-star read. And Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. I've read it maybe 3 times and want to keep rereading it. Number 6, Shameless Hater. Talk about a trending or popular book or author you did not enjoy and you don't care who knows it. Well, how much time do you have? I've got a little bit of a list here, and I'm not going to give any rants about them. If there is a rant to go with them, I will link it on my channel. I will link it in the show notes. I will link any reviews or anything like that underneath the title in my show notes. Didn't hate this, but didn't think it was a very good book. Sarah Moss's Ghost Wall. Bailed on this quite early. It has some of the worst sex writing in all of recorded literature. Kyung Suk Shin's The Court Dancer. David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas. Hated it. Bailed beginning of chapter 3, maybe. Tyree Jones's An American Marriage. The Women's Prize? Really? Didn't hate it. Thought it wasn't a very good novel. Sarah Perry's The Essex Serpent. Steinbeck's Cannery Row, I thought was pretty mediocre. And 2 puke-worthy novels about young gay male love. Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Sainz. Andre Acimon's Call Me By Your Name. Couldn't finish either one of those. Number 7, Shameless Flirt. Talk about a book that really turned you on in that special way. Or for the wusses that don't want to talk about their private lives, you could talk about something that touched you emotionally. And I am always talking about something that touched me or didn't touch me emotionally. So let's go to the perverted side of this prompt, shall we? I don't seek out fiction that gets me going. But in terms of literary writing that has been arousing, there's only one really that I can think of, and that is Alan Hollinghurst. This is his most recent novel, The Sparsholt Affair. This was a failure of a novel, but boy, the first chapter and a little bit in the second chapter really floated my boat. And it's been so long since I read any of his others. The last one I would have read was the one that won the Booker, The Line of Beauty, and it was pretty sexy. And his first one was his most sexual novel. I don't know if it's his first one. It's the first one I read, The Swimming Pool Library. Those are the ones of his that I've read. I have The Stranger's Child on my shelf. But, yeah, pretty hot. Ooh. So that's it. Number 8 is to tag a shameless amount of booktubers. So I got quite a list here. Jay Shea, Brian of Bookish, cousin of Always Doing. This might fit in with your smutathon, readathon plans. Steve Donahue, Justin of Ghost Reader, Too Tight Lautrec, Doris of Aldi Books. After you read that really dirty story that you loved and I didn't, what was it? Who was the author? Anyway, you might be just in the right mindset for this tag, Doris. Natalie of My Reading Days. You don't need any convincing, do you? And welcome back, Richard of Richard Reads. If you're back, do this tag. Otherwise, you're dead to me. Thanks, Dan, for the great tag, and thank you for watching.